I post videos like this every week. If that's your thing, hit like, subscribe, and stick around. Now, back to the tips. Walnuts. Walnuts have been gracing our plates for thousands of years, so much so that the Romans, clearly impressed, declared them Jupiter's acorns. Their uncanny resemblance to a human brain somehow convinced medieval doctors they could cure anything head-related, because obviously, shape equals function. English walnuts are the popular kids, while black walnuts are the moody, stronger, more bitter siblings who are also incredibly difficult to crack open. Apparently, humans were munching on these brainy snacks over 8,000 years ago in what is now Iran.
Almonds. Plot twist, almonds aren't actually nuts at all. They're the seeds of a fruit that's basically a cousin to peaches and plums. Hailing from the Middle East, they hitchhiked along the Silk Road and eventually decided to make California their personal kingdom, becoming its top agricultural export. The word almond even comes from the Greek amygdala, which coincidentally is also the root for the almond-shaped part of your brain. Mind-blowing, right? There are two kinds, the sweet ones we happily devour and the bitter ones, which are basically tiny packets of cyanide compounds and should be avoided unless you're a professional poison processor. Spanish missionaries brought these sneaky seeds to California in the 1700s, and now the Golden State produces a whopping 80% of the world's supply.
Peanuts, another imposter. Peanuts are not nuts either. They're legumes like beans and lentils, and they prefer to grow underground, away from the judgmental eyes of tree-dwelling nuts. Originally from South America, ancient Peruvians and Brazilians were cultivating them over 7,000 years ago. Portuguese traders introduced them to Africa, and then enslaved Africans brought them to North America. George Washington Carver, the peanut wizard, famously concocted over 300 uses for peanuts in the early 1900s, probably including peanut butter-flavored car fuel. Here's a bizarre fact. After pollination, peanut flowers literally bend down and shove their developing pods into the soil to mature in the dark. Talk about helicopter parenting.
Cashews. Cashews win the award for most dramatic growth habit. They dangle precariously from the bottom of a cashew apple, a fleshy fruit popular in Brazil but too fragile for international travel. The shell around the cashew nut contains urushiol, the same toxic oil found in poison ivy. This is why you never see cashews sold in their natural shell, unless you're into self-inflicted burns. Workers bravely roast and remove these treacherous shells, often sacrificing their skin in the process. Native to northeastern Brazil, Portuguese colonizers spread them to India and Africa in the 16th century. Today, Vietnam and India are the biggest producers. And yes, you guessed it, cashews are not technically true nuts.
Hazelnuts. Also known as filberts, hazelnuts have been around since prehistoric times, with evidence of mass consumption by Mesolithic people in Scotland. Perhaps they had messy hands from eating too many. The name filbert is said to come from Saint Filbert, a French abbot whose feast day conveniently falls during harvest season. Turkey holds the crown, producing about 70% of the world's hazelnuts, thanks to the perfect climate along the Black Sea coast. Hazelnuts famously became a key ingredient in Nutella, which was invented during World War II when an Italian pastry maker cleverly mixed hazelnuts into chocolate to stretch limited cocoa supplies. Necessity, it seems, is the mother of deliciousness. A single hazelnut tree can live and produce nuts for over 100 years, clearly in it for the long haul.
Pecans! Pecans are one of the proud few nuts actually native to North America. Indigenous peoples relied on them heavily, and their name comes from an Algonquian word meaning nut requiring a stone to crack, because who needs a nutcracker when you have a rock? Early European settlers quickly adopted pecans from Native Americans, and even Thomas Jefferson had pecan trees planted at Monticello. The commercial pecan industry kicked off in the 1880s, thanks to an enslaved Louisiana gardener named Antoine, who successfully grafted a superior pecan variety. Though he got little recognition during his lifetime, today the U.S., especially Georgia and Texas, dominates world production. These trees are practically immortal, living for 300 years and reaching over 100 feet tall.
Pistachios. Pistachios have been cultivated in the Middle East for at least 9,000 years, making them old enough to be mentioned in the Bible. Legend has it the Queen of Sheba hoarded the entire regional supply for herself and her court, the original nut hoarder. The nuts naturally split open as they ripen, which ancient Persians considered a symbol of good fortune. You could apparently hear them cracking at night in the groves, perhaps whispering sweet nothings. In the 1930s, a Syrian immigrant named Zulum planted the first commercial pistachio orchards in California, but it took nearly 50 years for the trees to produce significant harvests. Talk about delayed gratification. Iran and the United States now fiercely compete for the title of top producer. And just like cashews, pistachios are botanically not true nuts. They're drupes. The botanical world really likes to mess with our classifications.
Macadamia nuts. Native to Australia, macadamias are named after John McAdam, a Scottish-Australian scientist, even though indigenous Australians had been enjoying them for millennia before Europeans showed up. They boast the hardest shell of any nut, requiring over 300 pounds of pressure per square inch to crack. Good luck with your teeth! Hawaiian macadamia nuts gained fame after an Australian businessman planted the first commercial orchards there in the 1880s. The trees can take 7 to 10 years to produce their first harvest, and the nuts are notoriously difficult to process, which explains why they're one of the most expensive nuts in the world. Apparently, only 2 of the 9 macadamia species are even edible, so choose wisely.
Brazil nuts. These massive nuts hail almost entirely from wild trees in the Amazon rainforest. The trees are practically ancient, living for over 500 years and growing up to 160 feet tall. What makes Brazil nuts nearly impossible to farm is their incredibly specific pollination requirements. Only a single species of a large-bodied bee can pollinate the flowers, and that bee is ridiculously picky, depending on a particular orchid that only grows in undisturbed rainforests. The nuts grow in hard, coconut-like pods that can weigh up to 5 pounds and are so heavy they can literally kill someone if they fall from the tree. So, next time you're in the Amazon, wear a hard hat. Oh, and Brazil nuts are naturally radioactive due to their high radium content, though the levels are too low to cause you to glow in the dark, sadly.
Pine nuts. Pine nuts are edible seeds from certain pine trees that have been enjoyed since ancient times. Indigenous peoples in the American Southwest considered them a staple, while Mediterranean cuisines have been tossing them into dishes since ancient Rome. Harvesting is incredibly labor-intensive. Workers must bravely climb tall trees to collect pine cones, then painstakingly extract the tiny seeds, which totally justifies their hefty price tag. They're essential in traditional Italian pesto, though many modern cooks opt for cheaper alternatives. Be warned, some people experience pine mouth, a harmless but profoundly annoying metallic taste that can linger for days after eating certain varieties. It's the nuts' way of leaving a lasting impression.
Chestnuts. Unlike most nuts, chestnuts are the low-fat, high-carb rebels of the nut world, making them more akin to a grain trying to fit in. They were a dietary staple across Europe and Asia for centuries, often ground into flour. The American chestnut was once a forest giant, making up a quarter of all hardwood trees until a fungal blight, accidentally introduced from Asia, wiped out nearly all of them in the early 1900s.
Roasted chestnuts, sold by street vendors, were a common sight in cities like New York and London. Pro tip, if you don't cut the shell before roasting, they can explode from steam pressure, turning your cozy evening into a culinary hazard.
Coconuts, technically a drupe, the botanical snobbery continues. Coconuts are the largest seeds in the plant kingdom. They're also incredible survivors, able to float in ocean waters for months and still germinate when they wash ashore, which is how they conquered tropical islands. The name comes from Spanish and Portuguese explorers who thought the 3 dark spots on the shell looked like a grinning face, or a cocoa. Every single part of the coconut palm is useful, from the water and meat to the husk fiber for rope, leaves for roofing, and wood for building. Some Pacific Island cultures were so obsessed with coconuts that they had over 100 different words to describe their various stages of growth and ripeness, probably including the perfect one for my smoothie and the one that nearly took my head off.
Hickory nuts. Hickory nuts were a crucial food source for indigenous peoples in North America, often crushed into a rich paste called pakora, not the Indian fried snack, sadly. The nuts are encased in a thick husk that dramatically splits into 4 sections when ripe. While pecans are technically a type of hickory, most other hickory nuts are smaller and harder to extract, demanding more effort for your snack. Early American settlers cleverly used hickory wood for tool handles, wagon wheels, and smoking meat, giving us that delightful hickory smoked flavor. These nuts are extremely high in fat, even more than pecans, making them valuable energy capsules for enduring winter.
Acorns. Acorns are the nuts of oak trees, and for thousands of years they were a dietary staple for many cultures worldwide. Native American tribes developed sophisticated processes to leach out their bitter tannins, essentially giving them a spa treatment of soaking and rinsing until they were sweet enough to eat or bake into bread. In Korea, acorn starch is used to make a jelly-like food called dodorimuk. During times of famine in Europe, people turned to acorn flour as a survival food, which tells you a lot about famine. Different oak species produce acorns with very different bitterness levels. White oak acorns are relatively mild, while red oak acorns require heavy processing. They're the divas of the acorn world. Acorns are one of the few foods that are botanically classified as true nuts. Take that, almonds and cashews.
Beech nuts. Beech nuts are small, triangular nuts cleverly hidden inside spiky husks. They were once widely eaten in Europe and North America and are ridiculously rich in oil. Their spiky husk splits open dramatically in autumn. In parts of Europe, they were pressed for cooking oil or roasted as a coffee substitute during shortages, because even during tough times, people needed their caffeine fix. The trees only produce large crops every few years in a phenomenon called masting, which scientists believe evolved to completely overwhelm seed predators like squirrels and birds. Indigenous peoples in North America ate beech nuts raw or roasted, and early settlers used them to fatten pigs. The nuts are small and incredibly tedious to gather and shell, which is why they're rarely sold commercially. But for those who put in the effort, they offer a delicate, sweet flavor.